always had a fascination with old, abandoned places, and when I heard about the disused subway station beneath our city, I knew I had to check it out. The station had been shut down decades ago, a relic from the early 20th century, hidden away in the labyrinth of tunnels that crisscrossed beneath the streets. Accessing it wasn't exactly legal, but that only added to the thrill. Equipped with a flashlight, a camera, and a sense of adventure, I ventured into the depths, ready to explore this forgotten piece of history. The entrance was a nondescript maintenance door tucked away in an alley. I slipped through easily, descending a narrow stairwell that seemed to spiral endlessly downward. The air grew colder and damper as I went, the musty smell of decay and mildew assaulting my senses. When I finally reached the bottom, I found myself in a long, dark tunnel. The station was supposed to be just a few hundred meters ahead, according to the old maps I'd studied. As I walked, the beam of my flashlight cut through the thick darkness, revealing graffiti-splattered walls and the occasional rat skittering away from the light. The silence was overwhelming, broken only by the faint drip of water from somewhere above. I kept moving, eager to reach the platform and see the station in all its decrepit glory. Finally, the tunnel opened up into the station. It was just as eerie as I had imagined. Peeling paint, rusted tracks, and a layer of dust thick enough to write your name in. Old advertisements, yellowed and crumbling, hung on the walls, frozen in time. I snapped a few photos, marveling at how this place had been forgotten by the world above. Then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. At the far end of the platform, a single subway car sat on the tracks. It was ancient, from a bygone era, its windows grimy and its paint chipped. This car shouldn't have been here. It wasn't on any map or report. The curiosity that had driven me down here now mixed with a growing sense of unease. Drawn by a mix of fear and fascination, I approached the car. The doors were closed, but as I neared, they creaked open with a groan. I hesitated, every horror movie instinct screaming at me to turn back. But I stepped inside, my flashlight revealing rows of old wooden seats. The air was stale, and an oppressive silence filled the car. It felt like stepping into a different time, a different world. As I walked through the car, I felt a strange sensation, like I was being watched. I swung my flashlight around, but there was no one, just the empty seats and the eerie quiet. But then, I spotted something. Someone. At the far end of the car, a figure sat hunched over in a seat, head resting on the window. My heart leapt into my throat. I hadn't seen anyone enter with me, and the platform had been empty. The figure was dressed in an old-fashioned suit, the kind people wore back when the station was still in use. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Was this some kind of prank? An actor? I called out, my voice echoing hollowly in the confined space. The figure didn't move. I took a cautious step closer, then another. When I was just a few feet away, the figure suddenly sat upright. I gasped, stumbling back. The man turned his head slowly toward me, revealing a pale, gaunt face. His eyes were sunken, dark circles etched around them, but it was his expression that chilled me to the bone, a look of utter despair, as if he had been waiting for something or someone for a very long time. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no sound came out. Instead, a low, mournful wail filled the car, growing louder and louder. The lights flickered, and the air grew colder. I backed away, my mind screaming at me to run. The man's eyes seemed to plead with me, as if begging for help or understanding, but I had none to give. I turned and bolted out of the car, the door slamming shut behind me with a force that shook the platform. I ran back through the tunnel, not daring to look back. The wail faded, but the terror clung to me like a second skin. When I finally burst out into the fresh air of the city, gasping for breath, I felt like I had escaped a nightmare. But the image of the last passenger, trapped in that forgotten subway car, haunted me. Who was he? What had kept him there, lingering in that abandoned station? I never found out, and maybe it's better that way. Some mysteries, I've learned, are better left unsolved. But every now and then, when I hear the distant rumble of the subway, I can't help but wonder if that car is still there, waiting, with its lone passenger forever trapped in time. What do you think happened to the last passenger? Was he simply a lost soul? Or did something far darker trap him in that forgotten subway car? Have you ever had an experience in an abandoned place that left you questioning reality? I'd love to hear your thoughts and stories in the comments below. And if that sent a chill down your spine, get ready for even more eerie encounters. The next story, The Phantom Engineer, will take you on a ride with a ghost train, one that you may not want to board. Stay tuned, you won't want to miss it. It was a crisp autumn night when I found myself wandering near an old, unused railway line in my hometown. As a writer, I often seek out these forgotten places for inspiration. There's something eerie yet captivating about the quiet rust of old iron and the solitude of abandoned tracks. That night, however, I was not prepared for the kind of inspiration I would find. The railway had been out of commission for decades, a relic from a bygone era. Locals had long since abandoned it, spinning ghost stories to keep kids away. As I walked along the track, the moon cast a pale glow on the rusty rails, making them glimmer like silver serpents under the night sky. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl or the rustle of leaves in the wind. I felt a chill run down my spine, but shrugged it off. It was just the cold, I told myself. But then, I heard it. A faint, distant whistle. At first, I thought it was my imagination, a trick played by the wind. But as I continued walking, the sound grew louder, more distinct. A train whistle, unmistakably. My heart started pounding. It couldn't be real. The tracks were dead. Yet there it was, clear as day, echoing through the night. Curiosity got the better of me. I quickened my pace, following the sound. The tracks seemed to stretch endlessly, each step amplifying my unease. I was about to turn back, convincing myself it was just some prank or an auditory hallucination, when the ground beneath me began to tremble. The vibrations were unmistakable. Something was coming. I stopped dead in my tracks, heart hammering in my chest. And then, I saw it. A train, old and majestic, chugging along as if it were still the 1940s. It was surreal, like stepping into a time warp. The engine was a monstrous, black behemoth, steam billowing from its stack like a specter. As it drew closer, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There was no one in the engine car. The train was moving, but it was empty. The whistle blew again, louder and more mournful this time. I stood frozen, torn between fascination and fear. The train slowed as it approached, its iron wheels screeching against the rusty tracks. As it passed by me, I saw into the passenger cars. They were filled, but not with people, at least not anymore. Pale, ghostly figures sat in the seats, their eyes staring blankly ahead, unmoving. Their faces were devoid of emotion, almost as if they were trapped in a permanent state of purgatory. I couldn't tear my eyes away. One of the figures, a woman with long, dark hair and a tattered dress, turned her head slowly to look at me. Her eyes were hollow, empty voids that seemed to pierce through me. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. The train continued to roll past, car after car of these spectral passengers, until finally, the last car disappeared into the night. I stood there, breathless and terrified. The whistle echoed once more, then faded into the distance. The vibrations ceased, and all was silent again. The train was gone, leaving behind nothing but the oppressive stillness of the night. What had I just witnessed? A ghost train? A collective hallucination? As a writer, I'd always been skeptical of such things, but this was something else. It felt real, too real. I glanced down at the tracks, expecting to see some sign of the train's passage, but there was nothing. No fresh rust, no displaced gravel. It was as if the train had never been there at all. I turned and hurried back the way I came, my mind racing with questions. Had I encountered the legendary Phantom Engineer, a ghost train said to roam the tracks at night? I had no answers, only a gnawing fear that I had glimpsed something beyond understanding, something that would haunt me for the rest of my days. When I took the night job as a security guard at the defunct railway museum, I thought it would be easy money. The place was a relic, filled with old train cars and memorabilia from the golden age of rail travel. It was the kind of place that might fascinate a train enthusiast, but bore the average person. The museum had been closed to the public for years due to funding issues, but they still needed someone to keep an eye on things at night. Easy, right? My first shift was uneventful. I wandered through the silent halls, my flashlight casting eerie shadows on the dusty displays. The old train cars, once bustling with life, now stood as silent sentinels of the past. The museum had a particular exhibit dedicated to the luxurious Pullman carriages, with plush seating and ornate woodwork, a stark contrast to the utilitarian trains of today. One car in particular caught my eye, a grand old steam engine, complete with a restored conductor's cabin. The brass accents and polished woodwork gleamed even in the dim light. I was fascinated by the detailed controls and gauges, imagining the stories of the people who had once operated it. As the night wore on, I made my rounds, occasionally stopping to admire the craftsmanship of the old trains. At around 2 a.m., I decided to take a break and sat down near the conductor's cabin. That's when things started to get strange. I heard a faint sound like the clinking of metal on metal. At first, I thought it was just the building settling, but then it grew louder. It was coming from inside the conductor's cabin. I stood up, flashlight in hand, and approached the cabin door. The sound was clearer now, unmistakably the clinking of keys. I pushed the door open and shone my flashlight inside. Nothing. The cabin was empty, just as it had been all night. I chalked it up to my imagination, maybe the wind rustling through the old structure. But as I turned to leave, the door slammed shut behind me with a deafening bang. I jumped, dropping my flashlight. In the sudden darkness, the temperature seemed to plummet. I fumbled for my light, my hands shaking. When I finally managed to turn it on, I was greeted by a sight that made my blood run cold. The once empty conductor's chair was now occupied. Sitting in the chair was a figure dressed in a vintage conductor's uniform, complete with a brass button jacket and a peaked cap. His face was obscured by shadow, but I could feel his eyes on me. My heart raced as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. Was it a prank? A mannequin? But then, the figure moved. He turned his head slowly toward me, and I caught a glimpse of his eyes, cold, piercing, and utterly devoid of life. He reached out a gloved hand toward the controls, and to my utter disbelief, the gauges and dials began to move as if the train was coming to life. The air filled with the hiss of steam and the distant rumble of an engine. I could feel the floor beneath me vibrate as if the train was ready to depart. Panic set in. I had to get out of there. I lunged for the door, yanking it open and stumbling out into the corridor. The sounds of the train, so real and immediate, faded as I put distance between myself and the cabin. My breath came in ragged gasps as I sprinted through the darkened museum, not daring to look back. I didn't stop running until I burst through the museum's front door, into the cool night air. I stood there, gasping, trying to collect my thoughts. What the hell had just happened? Was it a ghost? An echo of the past? I had no idea, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going back inside. I quit the job the next day, leaving behind whatever mysteries the museum held. To this day, I wonder what I saw in that conductor's cabin. Was it a spirit, still faithfully performing his duties long after death? Or was it just a figment of my imagination, brought on by the eerie atmosphere and the late hour? Whatever it was, it left a mark on me. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear the distant clinking of keys, and I wonder if the conductor is still waiting for his train to depart. If you want to see more horror stories, check out my next video.